When Nicole lost her husband Stephen, his parents didn't come to console her. They came with a document demanding $120,000 for a loan they claimed he never repaid. They threatened court, they threatened to take her home, and Nicole sat there in her charcoal dress, still reeling from the funeral, unable to speak. What they didn't know was that Stephen was a meticulous record keeper. And the truth buried in his files didn't just prove the debt was a lie, it revealed a secret debt of their own, one that would make this confrontation unforgettable. Nicole, 33, buried her husband Stephen, and his parents immediately demanded $120,000. They claimed he'd borrowed it. They wanted her house. She had no power, no lawyer, no fight left, but Stephen had kept every financial record. Buried in those papers was proof that the debt was a lie, and evidence that his parents actually owed him $40,000. The showdown would start in her living room, just days after the funeral. Nicole and Stephen had been married for 7 years. He was an engineer, quiet, steady, the kind of man who kept spreadsheets for their grocery budget and scanned every receipt. They bought the house on Maple Street 3 years into the marriage. A fixer-upper with a wraparound porch and big windows that flooded the living room with morning light. Stephen loved that house. He poured his weekends into it, refinishing floors, rebuilding the deck, painting the shutters a deep forest green. They paid it off early, every extra dollar from his bonuses going straight to the principal. By the time Stephen got sick, the house was theirs, free and clear. No mortgage, no liens, no strings. The cancer moved fast. Diagnosed in April, terminal by June. Stephen spent his final weeks at home, Nicole by his side, the hospice nurse visiting twice a day. His parents, Richard and Barbara, came once, stayed for an awkward hour, and left. They had never been close. Stephen had told Nicole early on that his parents were transactional people, the kind who kept score. Love was measured in favors given and repaid. He had distanced himself years ago, tired of the constant tallying. 3 days after the funeral, Richard and Barbara appeared at Nicole's door unannounced. They didn't bring food or flowers. They brought a manila folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, dated 5 years earlier. It stated that Stephen had borrowed $120,000 from his parents to start a business that never materialized. The signature at the bottom looked like Stephen's, but Nicole couldn't be sure. The document was vague, no repayment terms, no witnesses, no notary stamp. Richard said Stephen had promised the house as collateral, now he wanted it. Nicole felt the floor drop out, she had never heard of this loan. Stephen had never mentioned it. She was drowning in grief, barely eating, barely sleeping, and now the people who were supposed to be family were demanding she sign over the deed. Richard told her if she didn't comply within 30 days, he'd take her to court. He had connections, he said. He'd drag this out until she was broke. That night, Nicole sat alone in the dark living room staring at the folder. Something didn't add up. Stephen was meticulous to a fault. If he'd owed that kind of money, there would be records. He had a filing cabinet in the basement, 4 drawers stuffed with folders labeled by year and category. She teased him about it constantly. She walked down the creaking basement stairs, flipped on the light, and pulled open the drawer marked 2018. What she found rewired everything. Bank statements showing 4 transfers of exactly $30,000 each, spread across that same year, sent from Stephen's account to Richard's. Payment memos reading simply loan repayment. Then, behind the bank records, a single page, a signed release, stamped and dated December 31st, 2018. It stated that all debts between Stephen Foster and Richard and Barbara Foster were fully settled, mutually released, and permanently resolved. And at the bottom, in her father-in-law's unmistakable looping signature, was Richard's name alongside Barbara's. Nicole's hands trembled as she kept digging. Behind the release, she found another document, this one a different kind of loan agreement. It was signed 2 years later, in 2020, and it showed Richard and Barbara borrowing $40,000 from Stephen. Payment was due within 18 months. There were no records of any repayment, not 1 cent. She looked up at the ceiling, her husband's voice echoing in her memory. If anything ever happens to me, the filing cabinet has everything you need. She hadn't understood what he meant. Now she did. Richard and Barbara weren't creditors, they were debtors, and they had come to her home, weaponizing her grief, gambling that she'd never look. They were wrong. Nicole sat on the cold basement floor, the signed release clutched in her hands. The date was December 31st, 2018. Remembered that New Year's Eve. Stephen had been in a strangely good mood, telling her that a weight had finally been lifted. She hadn't asked what weight. She just kissed him and popped the champagne. Now she understood. He had cleared the debt, all of it, and his parents had signed their names, releasing him forever. Yet not 5 years later, they were waving the very same loan like a weapon, as if Stephen had never paid a cent. She spread the documents across the floor. Bank statements from 2018. 4 wire transfers, 30,000 each, sent to Richard's account at First National. The first was February 2nd, the next May 10th, then August 15th, and the final on December 30th. 120,000 in total. The memo lines on the wires read simply, loan repayment. Each one had been confirmed by the receiving bank. These weren't ambiguous, they were ironclad. Then the release itself, typed on plain white paper but notarized. The seal from a local notary public, Maria Gonzalez, whose stamp number was clearly visible. Dated December 31st, 2018, 11:47 in the morning. It stated that Richard and Barbara Foster, by signing below, acknowledged that the loan of $120,000, originally agreed on January 5th of that year, had been fully repaid, and that all claims, known or unknown, against Stephen Foster were extinguished. The signatures were unmistakable, the same looping cursive she'd seen on birthday cards for years. Richard's heavy strokes, Barbara's smaller, precise letters. They had released him. They had forgotten, or they had hoped she would never find it. Stapled behind the release was a second document. A promissory note dated March 4, 2020. Richard and Barbara Foster promised to pay Stephen Foster $40,000 by September 4, 2021, with 2% interest. The purpose line said, home repair loan. Nicole recalled Stephen mentioning that his parents needed a new roof, that he'd helped them out. What he hadn't mentioned was that it was a formal loan, not a gift. She found no record of repayment anywhere. She searched the bank statements from 2021 through 2023. No deposits of $40,000, no partial payments, nothing. They'd borrowed money from their son and never paid it back, and now they were trying to take his house. The next morning, Nicole called Monica, Stephen's longtime attorney and friend. Monica had handled their wills and the closing on the house. She came over that afternoon, examined the documents, and looked up with a steady gaze. She said 2 words, they're cooked. The notary seal was verifiable. The bank records were authentic. Monica told Nicole to stay quiet, to give no hint of what she'd found. Let them file their claim, Monica said. When they do, we bury them. But Richard and Barbara didn't file a claim. Instead, 2 days later, Nicole received a certified letter. It was a draft complaint, threatening to sue her for the house, alleging that Stephen had committed fraud by not disclosing the debt when he took out his mortgage. The letter was full of legal-sounding threats, demanding she vacate within 30 days. It was signed by a lawyer Nicole had never heard of, a small-time general practitioner from a strip mall office 2 towns over. Monica made a few calls. The lawyer had a reputation for filing nuisance suits to pressure settlements. They wanted Nicole to panic, to sign something, to walk away. That evening, Nicole's phone rang. Richard, his voice was oily, measured. He said he didn't want to involve lawyers, that they were family, and that if she just signed over the deed, they could avoid all this unpleasantness. He said Stephen would have wanted to make things right. Nicole gripped the phone, her knuckles white. She said, I'll think about it, and hung up. Then she opened Stephen's filing cabinet again and began cataloging every document, every receipt, every piece of paper that tied them to their own debt. She found emails. In 2020, Richard had sent Stephen a message thanking him for the loan, promising to repay as soon as the roof was done. Barbara had emailed separately, apologizing for the delay, saying they'd have the $40,000 by Christmas of 2021. Christmas came and went. So did the next Christmas and the one after that. The debt remained unpaid. Nicole printed every email, put them in chronological order, and slid them into a binder labeled, The Truth. 3 weeks after the funeral, Richard and Barbara showed up at Nicole's door again. This time, they didn't ring the bell. They walked around the side of the house and let themselves in through the back gate. Nicole found them standing on her patio, staring through the sliding glass door. Barbara was holding a clipboard with a written agreement, a quitclaim deed already prepared. Richard told her she had 2 choices, sign it now or face a lawsuit that would cost her everything. Nicole looked at them through the glass, her heart pounding, but her voice was steady. She told them to come back Friday. She said she needed time to think. When they left, she called Monica and said, I'm not running from them. I'm going to confront them, and I want it on video. Monica agreed. They set up a meeting for Friday at noon at Monica's office. Nicole would have the binder, the bank records, the release, the promissory note, and a hidden camera. She wasn't just going to defend her home, she was going to show the world exactly who Richard and Barbara Foster really were. But here's the thing Richard didn't know. While he was drafting a fake debt claim, Nicole had uncovered something else buried in Stephen's files. A life insurance policy he'd taken out years ago, with a beneficiary clause that named Richard and Barbara, contingent only if Nicole predeceased him. They had already tried to file a claim on that policy, telling the insurance company Nicole was financially incapacitated and couldn't manage the estate. The insurance investigator had already flagged the attempt as suspicious. Nicole now had the fraud investigator's report. And that piece of paper would be the first thing she laid on the table when they sat down face to face. Friday noon. Monica's office, a small brick building on Elm Street. Nicole arrived at 11:30, binder in hand, her charcoal dress pressed, the amethyst pendant Stephen gave her on their 5th anniversary resting against her collarbone. Monica had already set up the conference room, water glasses, a digital recorder disguised as a pen on the table, and a nanny cam tucked discreetly into a bookshelf facing the chairs. They rehearsed the sequence once. Insurance fraud report first, loan release second, the promissory note last. Layer the evidence like a trapdoor beneath a trapdoor. Richard and Barbara arrived at noon sharp, Richard in a suit that smelled faintly of mothballs, Barbara clutching the same manila folder from 3 weeks ago. They sat opposite Nicole, refusing Monica's offer of coffee. Richard began immediately, sliding a quitclaim deed across the polished table. Sign this, and we all walk away. No lawyers, no court, just family. Nicole didn't touch the paper. She looked at Monica, who nodded. She opened the binder to the first tab. Before we discuss property, she said, her voice steady, let's talk about the life insurance policy Stephen left behind. The one you tried to file a claim on by telling the insurance company I was financially incapacitated. She slid the investigator's report across the table. Richard's face twitched. Barbara's eyes widened, then narrowed. That's confidential, Richard said. It's actually a fraud report, and it names you both. The insurance company has already denied your claim and flagged your account. If you push this, I'll make sure the county prosecutor sees it. Richard picked up the report, scanned it, and set it down with a dismissive wave. This is a misunderstanding. We were told by a clerk, Monica cut him off. You sent an email from your personal account stating Nicole was unfit. We have the email. Barbara started to speak, but Richard put a hand on her arm. Nicole turned to the second tab. Now, let's talk about the loan you claim Stephen never repaid. She pulled out the bank statements. 4 wire transfers from Stephen's account to Richard's, $30,000 each. She read the dates and amounts aloud, then placed each statement on the table in a neat row. Those are fake, Richard said. Stephen must have doctored them. Nicole didn't blink. She pulled out the notarized release, signed by both Richard and Barbara, stamp and seal intact. Maria Gonzalez, Notary Public, notarized this at 11:47 in the morning on December 31st, 2018. I spoke to her yesterday. She remembers you both. She keeps a logbook. She's willing to testify. Richard's jaw tightened. Barbara stared at the signature as if it were a foreign object. We would have remembered signing that, she whispered. We didn't remember. Barbara started to say something, but Nicole raised a finger and opened to the third tab. And then there's this. She placed the promissory note in front of them, $40,000 borrowed by Richard and Barbara from Stephen in March 2020. You never repaid a penny. I checked every account. No deposits, no transfers, no checks. She laid down the printed emails. Richard, thank you for the loan message. Barbara's promise to repay by Christmas 2021. Then the follow-up emails from Stephen, gently asking about the roof repair money, each met with excuses, the stock market dip, unexpected medical bills, you know how it is. Richard's face was now pale. Barbara's hands shook. Nicole leaned forward. Stephen carried your debt for 4 years while you badmouthed him to anyone who'd listen. He never pushed because you were his parents, and your repayment was to try to steal my home. Richard stood up, chair scraping. This is absurd. You're trying to fabricate evidence. We'll see you in court. Monica stood too. Go ahead, I have every document authenticated, I have a notary witness, I have bank records, and I have a detailed account of your insurance fraud attempt. You will lose, and when you do, I'll pursue costs and sanctions. Richard grabbed the quitclaim deed from the table and ripped it in half. Barbara didn't move. She just stared at the photograph of Stephen on Nicole's keychain, the one taken on their last trip to the coast, him laughing in front of the ocean. But here was the moment that changed everything. Nicole reached into the binder one final time and pulled out something she hadn't shown anyone. A letter, handwritten by Stephen, dated 2 weeks before he died. She'd found it tucked inside his life insurance file, sealed in an envelope labeled in case they come after you. She had read it once, alone, and cried until she couldn't see. Now she unfolded it and read the first line aloud. If you're reading this, it means my parents broke their promise. The room went still. That letter would reveal not just a financial scheme, but a personal betrayal far deeper than anyone knew, and a final request from Stephen that would test Nicole's capacity for mercy. Nicole unfolded the letter, her voice steady but quiet. If you're reading this, it means my parents broke their promise. They promised me after I paid off the loan that they'd leave us alone. They signed the release, but I knew they'd come for this house. She paused, looking at Richard, then back at the page. This house belonged to my grandfather, Dad's own father. He cut Dad out of the will because of his cruelty and left it to me directly. Dad has never forgiven that. He views this house as his stolen birthright. The loan they claimed I never repaid was never about money, it was a trap to get the deed. I repaid them anyway. Every cent with interest, and I have the proof. She turned the page. Nicole, I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because carrying that anger was destroying me. I don't ask you to forgive them, I ask you to do what brings you peace. If they come for you, show them the truth. And if you ever hold power over them, if you find the debt they still owe me, I'm asking you to consider mercy, not for their sake, but because this house deserves to be filled with light, not resentment. You'll know the right thing, I love you. She set the letter down, the room was silent. Barbara's face had crumpled. Richard's hands were flat on the table, trembling. Richard's voice was hoarse. My father, he disowned me. That house was supposed to be mine. When Stephen got it, I thought I'd make it right. Barbara turned to him, her whisper breaking. You told me Stephen still owed us. You said he'd agreed to sign over the house. You lied to me, Richard. He couldn't meet her eyes. I just wanted what was ours by rights. Nicole said quietly. It was never yours. Monica slid a document across the table. It wasn't a quitclaim deed. It was a settlement agreement. Richard and Barbara Foster would renounce any and all claims against the estate and the property, admit to the wrongful insurance filing, and agree to no further contact with Nicole, effective immediately. In exchange, Nicole would not pursue the outstanding $40,000 promissory note, nor press charges for the fraud. Barbara picked up a pen and signed without hesitation, tears dripping onto the paper. Richard sat motionless for a long moment, then took the pen and signed, his signature barely legible. As they stood to leave, Nicole said one last thing. I'm not doing this because you deserve mercy. I'm doing it because Stephen asked me to, and because I refuse to let your bitterness live inside these walls. They walked out without a word. Monica filed the agreement that afternoon. The legal threats evaporated. The house was hers, free and clear. But the surprising part came a week later. Cleaning out the attic, Nicole found a small safe she'd never noticed, tucked behind Stephen's old blueprints. The combination was their anniversary. Inside, there was a second letter from Stephen, along with a stack of photographs. The photos showed the house in better days, the porch crowded with friends, the garden in bloom. The letter was short. Nicole, if you're reading this, it means you stood your ground and chose grace. I always knew you would. This house is now truly yours, but don't be alone in it. Fill it with laughter, with people who love you, with the family we never had. Don't let the silence win. At the bottom, he'd sketched a rough drawing of a new porch swing he'd always wanted to build. She hadn't cried in weeks, but she cried then, not from grief, but from the certainty that even in his absence, he'd still found a way to protect her and point her toward the future. She kept the house, and she kept the promise. Nicole kept the house, and she kept the promise. But her story isn't really about a house. It's about what happens when grief is exploited, and how quiet preparation can dismantle a lie. Stephen knew his parents would come. He left behind a roadmap, bank transfers, a notarized release, a promissory note they'd never repaid. He also left a request for mercy, not because his parents deserved it, but because he refused to let their bitterness infect the home he loved. Nicole honored that. She stood her ground with documents, not drama, and then she chose peace over revenge. In doing so, she turned a place of potential conflict into a sanctuary of light. That choice is rarer than we think. Many families fracture permanently over far less: unspoken resentments, perceived slights, the messy ambiguity of verbal promises. But here, clarity won. Nicole had the presence of mind to look in the basement filing cabinet when her world was falling apart. She didn't trust feelings, she trusted evidence. And when she had the power to crush those who'd wronged her, she chose instead to release them, not for their sake, but for her own freedom. The lingering question is not whether she was right, she was. It's what each of us would do in her shoes. Would we dig for the truth, or would we capitulate to pressure? Could we offer mercy when vengeance feels justified? Stephen believed she would know the right thing. She did. And in that, she preserved not just four walls and a roof, but a legacy of integrity that would have made him proud. If this story resonated with you, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of your records and even more, take care of each other.